Welcome to the audio tour of the Yellowstone Highway through the Wind River Canyon. Step back into time as you discover the history behind this innovative route through one of Wyoming's most breathtaking canyons. Gold miners, entrepreneurs, railroad men, auto enthusiasts, explorers, and adventurers. The pioneers of outlaw country, cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws, to the businessmen and women who all helped shape Wyoming. Here are their stories. Experience the rich history of the Yellowstone Highway through the Wind River Canyon.
In 1924, Howard Jackson, the deputy sheriff of Converse County, became one of the first motorists to drive on the new section of the Yellowstone Highway that drove through the treacherous Wind River Canyon in remote Wyoming. He was amazed by the 10,000 feet of mountain piled on top of him as he drove through the new rock tunnels and entered the canyon from the south. When he safely returned home, he told the Casper newspaper that it was a harrowing drive. He described driving through the 3 tunnels and coming out suddenly onto a shelf hung 200 feet above the water, where you could look straight down into a raging wind river and look straight up for half a mile and find that you are hung up there in midair, as it were. Jackson marveled at the engineering and the modern era it was about to usher in to the isolated Bighorn Basin of Wyoming and the tourists it would bring to Yellowstone National Park. Welcome to a special edition of Pioneers of Outlaw Country. I am your host, Jackie Dorothy, and we are taking an audio tour of a section of the Yellowstone Highway that was built through the Wind River Canyon of central Wyoming in 1924. Buckle up as we head back into time. By 1915, autos were becoming all the rage in Wyoming. Businessmen and women eagerly bought the vehicles in the big cities to bring back to their rural towns. These new motorists immediately encountered treacherous curves, steep inclines, and deep ruts cut into the hard-packed earth by horse-drawn wagons. Vernon Bauer was one such driver. He had gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as his Model T bounced down a narrow, rocky path. As his skinny tires slid over the loose rocks, he felt like he was falling into an abyss. Bauer was driving his fancy new vehicle over Birdseye Pass, a dangerous stagecoach route that soared above the Wind River Canyon to the west. When he finally made it to level ground, he vowed he would never drive that road again. On the trip back to his family in Moreland, Bauer abandoned his Model T at the town of Shoshone and rode the stagecoach the rest of the way home. Auto clubs were formed with the goal of improving these rough roads so that autoists would no longer be limited to just driving around their own town streets. They especially wanted to be able to take trips to Yellowstone National Park, which in 1915 had officially allowed cars. In 1916, in a special meeting with Wyoming Governor Kendrick, an innovative idea was presented by the citizens of Thermopolis. They were concerned that there was no safe route to their town or the Bighorn Basin. These new motorists proposed to replace Bird's Eye Pass with a highway through the Wind River Canyon instead of over it. Governor Kendrick heartily agreed with the radical idea and said, "I believe that the canyon route is an entirely feasible one, and that when the money for building it is available, it will become one of the best scenic routes imaginable." 8 years later, this highway to connect Shoshone to the Bighorn Basin and ultimately Yellowstone National Park was finally built. It was one of the Wyoming Department of Transportation's first major projects and the most expensive road in America. The official opening was on October 1st, 1924, on a cold, wintry day. Wyoming Governor Brooks arrived for the grand ceremony, and a convoy drove to the canyon tunnels to celebrate this state-of-the-art new highway. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Wyoming's history. For the first time, the Bighorn Basin, a remote and lawless region, was now accessible to the world. We invite you to join us on an audio tour of this 34-mile beautiful drive as you step back into the past and soak in the rich history of the Yellowstone Highway, now known as the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway. The town of Shoshone marks the beginning of the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway. This small town was founded in 1904 as a future railroad town. Within a short time, a tent city had sprung up in the sage, and Shoshone's population exploded to 2,000. Most had been drawn by the promise of a gold and copper rush. In 1906, it looked like this dream had come true. The railroad had arrived. In that same year, the local paper proclaimed that there was gold in the streets of Shoshone. The editors wrote that Houts, a prospector, brought some gold dust into town from the mountains. He was showing off his ore in front of the Shoshone Hotel when he accidentally dropped it on the street. Stocks and Jones, the owners of the hotel, brought out a pan and a broom. They swept up a considerable amount of sand with the prospector's gold, so they started to wash it out. Like wildfire, the news spread that gold had been found on the streets of Shoshone, and a crowd quickly gathered around the men washing the dirt. Bets were being offered as to whether the sand really contained gold, and when the shining metal began to make its appearance in the bottom of the pan, excitement shot up to 130 in the shade. Some of the crowd grabbed picks and shovels to begin tearing up the streets right away. Others began to fill their pockets with the dust of the street. One woman scooped as much as she could carry in the front of her new silk skirt, bringing home a load of Shoshone's municipal earth, which must have weighed at least 20 pounds. A number of the more enterprising had already begun to speculate in the stocks. The gold fever was just beginning to grab hold of everyone. Oh, and a word inadvertently dropped by Houts let the cat out of the bag. Stocks fell at least 100 points in 3 seconds, and the bottom fell out of Shoshone's gold boom in less than a minute. The gold and copper mines in nearby Copper Mountain also didn't pan out, and the town began to lose its population. By 1908, a fire had destroyed many of the businesses downtown. The remaining citizens rebuilt, and Shoshone remains today as the crossroads of Wyoming. As you leave the town of Shoshone behind, motorists will be given a sweeping view of Badwater Creek as it flows from the east into the Boysen Reservoir. The local Shoshone and Arapaho tribes named this deceptively quiet creek Badwater as a warning to those who would dare to camp alongside its banks. Oral history tells us of the people and teepees being swept away when the peaceful creek roared down the riverbed in a flash flood. This torrent of water was caused by sudden cloudburst in the higher country. Author Mary Helen Hendry wrote that settlers who arrived later at the creek declared it well named. They too experienced the placid stream suddenly becoming a swift river, spreading across the valley floor, cutting new channels, and carrying trees and debris across hay meadows ready to harvest. Before the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway reaches the mouth of the canyon and to the east is the old stagecoach route that once took travelers over Birdseye Pass. From 1905 to 1924, the Thermopolis Shoshone stage ran 36 miles between the two small towns. The Birdseye Halfway House, serving a most welcome hot lunch, was located exactly in the middle of the route. It took 11 hours, from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., to reach your destination one way. The route was located on Copper Mountain, and at the time, the canyon was an impassable chasm. Driving this stage could be dangerous business. John Hulse, a Jibo coal miner, survived wrecks, deep snow, and even robberies when he worked for E.J. Richards as a stagecoach driver over Birdseye Pass. There was one treacherous spot called Devil's Slide where many passengers opted to walk rather than ride. Hulse said the trail at this point was only 30 feet wide with an extremely steep grade. He hauled his passengers and freight from Shoshone to Thermopolis over miles of lonely wilderness, which proved a tempting target to highway robbers. 3 men lay in wait along the trail, with plans to hold up the stage. Hulse was driving, and sitting next to him was Old Man Moore, riding shotgun. As they rode up the trail, the bandits attempted to stop the stage. The team halted and the shooting began. Old Man Moore fell to the floor of the driver's seat, leaving Hulse and a passenger to hold off the would-be thieves. The passenger, who Hulse said had a Luger, was wounded and his handgun jammed. After some time, the bandits, seeing that their attempts were futile, gave up and left without any loot. Hulse continued to drive the stage until returning to the coal mines, a much safer occupation. Back on the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway, the Boise State Park and Dam can be seen to the west. The sparkling blue of the large reservoir is the story of one man's dreams and failures as he fought against nature and the railroad to build a dam. Asmus Boysen, a Danish immigrant born in 1868, was seeking business prospects. On a mining exploration trip to Wyoming, he found the opportunity he was looking for. In 1899, rumors of gold and copper in the Copper Mountains were beginning to spread, and Boysen knew these mines would need electricity. Boysen decided that the Wind River flowing through the canyon would be ideal for a dam and power plant. He hired over 1,000 workers and brought in the best equipment possible into the remote region. Boysen's dam was finished in 1908. However, despite investing $2 million of his own money into the dam, he ultimately failed. Floods, blizzards, and court battles with the railroad, who were fighting flooded tracks because of his dam, bankrupt Boysen, and he was unable to make his dam profitable. After 15 years of court battles, His 35-foot dam was demolished in 1931. Just over a decade later, the United States Bureau of Reclamation decided the region did need the electric plant after all. They constructed the 220-foot earth-filled dam that stands today 1.5 miles upstream from the original site and named it Boysen Dam in honor of the Danish immigrant. The railroad was finally forced to move their tracks higher to accommodate the new dam and the higher water. This second dam was built in a new era of America. World War II was over and young men flocked to the Wind River Canyon from miles away. Word had gotten out that laborers were needed and the pay was good. From 1946 to 1952, the Boysen Dam was being built to provide electricity, irrigation, and recreation to the area. By 1947, Barney Smith had built the dam bar by the highway tunnels. He provided food, a full bar, dancing, and gambling for these young workers. He was known to be short in stature, but not short in pranks. Across the highway from the bar was a small wooden shack with a large sign proclaiming it as the Dam Privy. Rest stops in those days were few and far between, so this outhouse was a welcome sight to travelers. Barney would wait for a woman to stop by in need of the facilities. Back in the bar, the crowd would grow quiet in anticipation as she entered the outhouse. Barney would wait for the appropriate moment and then speak into his PA system.
"Hey, look out! We are painting down here!"
The crowd would roar with laughter as the woman would stumble out of the Dam Privy in horror and jump in her waiting vehicle to speed away. She was unaware, of course, that the outhouse was wired with a speaker under her seat. Today, all that is left of this once lively bar are the rock foundations next to the highway tunnels. But if you listen close enough, you just might hear the boisterous laughter of the long-ago construction workers and other bar patrons as they enjoyed their time off work. The Wind River, known for its white rapids, flows through the canyon bearing its name and runs parallel to the highway. It is believed that early explorers and trappers once navigated the river with their cache of beaver skins. There is only one record of such a trip, since apparently the river was deemed too rough for frequent trips. Before the Boysen Dam was completed, the rapids were even more wild and woolly than they are now. From 1948 to 1952, the annual JC's Memorial Day boat race was held. It was considered the world's roughest racing course, and the winner was declared the champion whitewater boatman of the world. People lined up for miles along the highway to watch. Danger was close at hand. Newspaper accounts report that the year 1951 was especially full of accidents and near misses. Good sportsmanship awards were handed out to two Cowley, Wyoming racers who rescued a Billings, Montana man when he was thrown from his boat. They followed him for about 7 miles before successfully fishing him out of the river. Lloyd Barnes was also rescued by fellow racers after his boat broke up in Pink Canyon. The Lynch brothers lost their borrowed boat after they made it through Pink Canyon and took an icy bath. Their boat was recovered miles away near the mouth of the canyon. 6 men were hospitalized from shock and exposure, but all were released the same day. That year, 26 boats were entered and 13 finished. They ranged from crude homemade affairs to specially designed riverboats. Skill and daring were prerequisites, which explains why Johnny Wells, the top competitor in the race, had won in 1949 by riding in the converted belly gas tank of a P-38 airplane. The race lasted only a few years. Once the Boysen Dam was completed, the annual race ended and many of the participants, workers on the dam, moved on to other places. "40 years before these races, the railroad was being built in the canyon. According to Harry Schaefer, surveyor and laborer on the project, the Burlington line was built completely by hand labor. 2,000 to 5,000 men were on the project at all times. Many were foreigners such as Swedes, Italians, and Japanese. They worked 6 10-hour days a week with Sunday off. Wyoming winters are bitter, but there are no seasonal break. 7 work camps were set up at various points in deep canyon ravines, and 3 big camps had commissaries. The blasting men had the dangerous job, but the pick and shovel crews had the back-breaking work. Not even Fresnos and scrapers could be brought into the canyon. Rock was carried by hand or on small carts, and the roadbed was built up with picks and shovels. Men would climb up the canyon walls, packing dynamite by hand, walk along high, narrow ledges, and blast off rock. After it came tumbling down, the rock was used to build up the roadbed. Since accidents did occur, there was also a cemetery and a temporary tent hospital at each end of the canyon. Once, 5 men had been pulled up the side of a high cliff in Boson's chairs to set explosives. Suspended by ropes, they hammered holes for powder and dynamite charges, all at once. And the whole section broke off, sending the men hurtling to the bottom. 4 were dashed to death on the jagged rocks below. An estimated 200 burros were also employed by the railroad from 1909 to 1911 to help with this hand labor. Although often difficult to work with, the mules were necessary and the best choice for the hard work of laying tracks through the Wind River Canyon. They could go for days with little water and less food, pulling heavy loads over rocky hills and down narrow ravines. These burros did most of the packing for the railroad. After a pack stream was loaded at Minnesota, at the mouth of the canyon, these burros did most of the packing for the railroad. After a pack stream was loaded at Minnesota, at the north end of the canyon, they were moved by ferry, about 12 to a load, to the east side of the river. Then, usually without a guide, they followed a trail along the canyon walls to a swinging bridge near the center of the canyon. They crossed the bridge back to the west side of the river. Here, men from each crew met them and took charge of their supplies. That line could not have been built without those mules. In 1911, when the railroad was completed through the canyon, the burros were just turned loose. Some were taken in by local people for pets. One of the burros, who ran wild in the canyon, became a local Thermopolis legend. For a number of years, he stepped out from behind a big rock each day to watch the passenger train go by. Chimney Rock is an iconic feature in the Wind River Canyon and was also a popular stop for passenger trains. The Roaring Twenties introduced a new spectacle to the Wind River Canyon: sightseeing tourists. Not to be outdone by the new Yellowstone Highway going through the canyon, the railroad built an excursion platform in the canyon for their passenger trains in 1925. This stopover was built at Dornick, a former railroad station, and offered tourists a view of Chimney Rock. Just a year later, a stir was created across the nation and in Thermopolis. Headlines announced the arrival of European royalty to America. Queen Marie of Romania arrived in the U.S. to great fanfare. New York City gave a ticket parade in her honor, and President Coolidge hosted her in his first state dinner at the White House. Excitement bubbled over when she boarded a special train, dubbed the Royal Romanian, to begin her friendship tour of the United States. Her whirlwind tour took her through Wyoming, and it soon became news that she would be the first known royalty to ever set foot in the Wind River Canyon. The big day arrived in late October 1926, and the Royal Romanian stopped at the Dornick excursion deck. The Queen greeted the citizens of Thermopolis beneath the towering Chimney Rock before continuing on her way. The Yellowstone Highway emerges on the north end of the canyon and enters prehistoric times. Near the entrance, a cave was excavated and artifacts from early people dating back to 10,000 years proves that the region had been used for countless centuries. These items, ranging from arrowheads, beads to fishing nets, were documented in 1962 by George Frizen, an archaeologist and professor at the University of Wyoming. To the west of the highway is the Wedding of the Waters, the only known place in the world where one river changes name midstream. The Wind River suddenly is the Bighorn River as it emerges from the canyon that bears its name. This strange phenomenon occurred because early explorers thought they were mapping out two rivers, not one. The terrain through the rugged Wind River Canyon was so impassable that few realized the mistake until it was too late. For over 100 years, no one could agree where the name change actually occurred. It took the Chamber of Commerce to make the distinction. In the 1930s, the Thermopolis Chamber placed a sign to mark the official spot where the river changes names. As the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway emerges into the red dirt of the Chugwater Formation, the town of Thermopolis is ahead. It was founded around the hot springs that flows through the region and gave it its name, which was Greek for hot city. When word was received in 1897 that the land surrounding the mineral hot springs on the Wind River Indian Reservation was open for settlement, the businessmen 7 miles north of the site immediately sprang into action. Before anyone could claim the land as an individual homestead, a rider was sent to Lander, the county seat, to file on the town site of Thermopolis. 1 mile square was set aside as a reserve, which is now known as Hot Springs State Park. This was Wyoming's first state park and is home to the world's largest hot springs. Thermopolis was originally founded by outlaws and associates of the hole-in-the-wall gang, and the remote, nearly inaccessible town was known as a place to hide out from the law. Jack Hollywood, an early pioneer and businessman, ran one of the first saloons in the area. It was a simple dugout with dirt floors and a rock wall in Smoky Row. It was known as a rough place to hang out. One night, Stanley Miller, a professional gambler, was dealing cards in a heated game. This game was interrupted when the door opened gently and the muzzle of a six-shooter preceded a masked bandit. This fellow calmly told the fellows to get up and line themselves up against the wall. He coolly removed all the valuables from the tables and the pockets of the victims and made his exit as unconcerned as he came in. Some were unsettled, others smiled, some laughed, and in the end, it was decided to be quite a joke as the game was brought to a definite close with nothing to play for. The balance of the evening was spent in telling of similar scenes in other places and discussing the wickedness of the world. Eventually, Hollywood moved to a more permanent saloon in town, and Smoky Row was abandoned as Thermopolis became a bit more civilized. This section of the Yellowstone Highway finishes at Hospital Hill, now the home of Wyoming State Bison Herd. They have roamed the Hot Springs State Park since being introduced in 1916. The Yellowstone Highway continues on to Cody, Wyoming, and of course, to the Yellowstone National Park. We hope you enjoyed this trip through Wyoming's rich past on the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway, a section built as part of the Yellowstone Highway through Wyoming.
Thank you for listening to the Pioneers of Outlaw Country. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of this historic series. The stories of our pioneers were brought to you by Hot Springs County Pioneer Association. This podcast was supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This was a production of Legend Rock Media.